Now Donald Trump is talking and taking on the left coast. Look at that crowd already. That's Fresno, California. His event's about to kick off any moment now. But it's Trump's, listen, he's not looking to this June 7th primary. Now he's starting to focus and talk exclusively about November, and he's focused on how to fix this economy. Last hour, Steve Moore confirming that he is helping Donald Trump to come up with a fix.
Ludlow and I met with Mr. Trump about a month ago. We've been working with his policy staff, and so it's been fun. Now, look, like on the tax plan, he has a tax plan, Charles. He wrote that many months before we got involved. What we're trying to do is maybe just tweak it a little bit. These reports that he's backing off his tax plan, those are completely false.
Charlie Gasparino first to report Trump's push to be, quote, more Reagan-esque. He's joined along with Liz MacDonald and David Asman. You know, Steve Moore, we always get back to the trade issue, right, guys, because that's where the classic economists like the Steve Moores and the Larry Kudlows have had issues with Donald Trump. It sounded like he feels like he's making some inroads, even though he says, hey, he does like the idea of pushing. Everyone likes the idea of pushing tougher deals.
Well, I'm sorry, I kind of stepped on a little bit there. Like I said, how does he know? Because really, no one really knows what's going inside.
Well, he can only say, though, what he's had from his conversations. Well, he feels confident that in his conversations with Donald Trump's people and Trump, that he's starting to come around.
He said more than that. He said what the reports that Donald has changed his plans are completely false. I will say this. We reported yesterday about how Art Laffer is behind the scenes very heavily involved with Trump. These are all the supply side gang, the guys that David knows. He was part of that whole crew.
We should explain, by the way, I know because I used to work at the Wall Street Journal edit page, but he doesn't have the edit page
I keep pushing him. Are you sure Donald's behind it? What they tell me is every time they talk about taxes and the notion of supply side economics where you lower tax rates to increase revenues in the future, that's the theory. It's more than a theory. It worked in the 80s. It worked by Art Laffer, but let me make this point, Charles. He has done 180s and 160s on so much of his economic message that it's hard to believe that he's really committed to anything.
I just want to refresh the audience. When we were coming in, we conflated two things. I was talking about the trade part, which is where a lot of people have problems. What Steve Moore said is that Donald Trump is committed to his tax plan, his lower taxes. Okay. So that's what he was talking about.
And I had Steve Moore on yesterday, and I asked him specifically about trade. I said, look, the one thing all the supply siders agree on is you've got to have free trade. Have you convinced Donald Trump about that? The idiot idea of forcing Apple to manufacture its iPhones here in the United States, which are double the cost, which means everybody would stop buying iPhones and they'd start buying Samsungs. Right. Can you dissuade him of that idea? And Steve didn't give me a solid answer.
Well, neither does Art Laffer. When you ask him.
So is it your sense then that his policy compass could be so easily swayed, and then it becomes his policies become idiosyncratic?
What do you say?
I don't say easily swayed. It seems like
they have in 180s.
Yeah. I don't say easily swayed, guys, but here's the thing. There's a populist movement out there, and it kind of bothers me when you talk to longtime Republicans and you say, to your point, an Apple phone would have to cost more. A lot of people are telling me, well, then Apple just makes fewer profits. That's always been a Democrat liberal ideology. And now I'm hearing more and more conservatives or people who've been lifelong conservatives saying they're okay with Apple not having.
I haven't heard that one.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, you have to believe that.
What percent of Apple's products come from the iPhones? The overwhelming majority of its assets come from iPhones. If their iPhones doubled in cost, which is essentially what would happen if they were forced to manufacture them here, everybody would buy these a Samsung instead of an Apple, and Samsung is not an American company.
Well, let's be real clear here about. Listen, I've known Donald for a long time. I personally like Donald a lot, but his economic policies are completely incoherent. He says, on one hand, he wants to lower debt payments to the people who hold our debt, the foreign countries, by forcing them to accept better deals. Then he realizes that that would be tantamount to default, so he does a 180 on that. He has said he's willing to negotiate his rates on his tax plan, which we understand that, but you don't start negotiating, particularly if he wins, he's going to have a Republican Congress. He won't have to negotiate. He's done and then this whole thing about trade, which is sort of incomprehensible, that we're going to engage in massive trade wars around the world, and that's going to help the American worker. I'm just telling you that somebody, and you know, we should just call it as it is.
But Charlie, he knows business. He knows, and he was in a business that is very highly regulated.
What business does he know?
Building things.
That is not the same as this.
He has 22,000 employees. He's the only candidate running. He's the only candidate running who has employed people, who's created jobs, and he knows how to deal. Let me finish. He knows how to deal with regulations. He knows how to deal with taxes. Let me finish what I'm saying, Charlie. He also knows how to deal with the tax man, and he knows the absurdity of our tax law.
David,
so he will listen to, I'm persuaded, he will listen to Art Laffer and Steve Moore and others talk about supply-side taxes. On trade, I think you're right.
Ronald Reagan created many, many, many more jobs than Donald Trump ever has or ever will. That's all I'm going to tell you.
Ronald Reagan created.
What do you mean? Trump is not the president.
But you're talking about the 22,000 jobs.
Policy.
Let me bring EMAC in. Let me bring EMAC in for a moment.
Policies are insane.
But here's the thing, though, EMAC. Sometimes people campaign different than they govern.
Yep.
And I think to David Asman's point, Donald Trump is meeting with the right people. He is listening to the right people. And at the end of the day, you can't do some of these things anyway. I mean, some of them really are not achievable. And we kind of been hearing this a little bit on a variety of Donald Trump, of the foundation of his campaign, whether it's a complete ban of all Muslims temporarily.
We got yes, I hear you. We have to do a broad zoom 30,000-foot perspective. We just had a really bad read on GDP. Again, not so great. What, 0.8%? Yeah. It's lower than Europe. Europe is growing faster than the U.S. in the last 2 quarters. So Hillary Clinton, we know what her policies are. And Bill Clinton, by the way, would have rejected Hillary Clinton's big government. He was the era of big, less government. So, you know, that's the issue. I mean, the job creation policies, do you prefer Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton?
But what you guys are missing, though, and I think that, and I'm going to throw it out there again, perhaps the American public, and it kind of scares me, to be quite frank with you, is okay with the government in a patriotic move, taking a little bit off the corporate income statement and dispersing it to the American public in the form of jobs.
I will say two things. Number one, we should point out that President Obama ran on an agenda that he achieved. There are no surprises in what President Obama gave us. Ronald Reagan did the same. Bill Clinton did the same.
Well, Obama said he was going to cut the deficit. He did campaign on that, but he blew it out.
But all his policies,
he's checked off a few things.
All his policy things, you know, I mean, he didn't lie to us.
So you're saying Donald Trump is lying?
He's going to have to lie to us for this to make any sense. Because
he can't evolve on these issues. He can't say, listen.
And of course, no other politician in history has ever lied on the campaign trail. Bottom line is, who do you trust to create jobs more? Hillary Clinton? Does she know more about job creation than Donald Trump? Absolutely not. She employs 486 people at the Clinton Foundation, and most of those people rely on crony capitalists to chip in the money for it. Is that a private sector? That's as close as she comes to creating jobs. Donald Trump has at least 22,000 jobs that he himself has created.
Bill Clinton created a lot more jobs than Donald Trump.
Thanks for the dot-com boom.
And lower capital gains and embracing supply. Ask Art Laffer.
Bill Clinton made a move to the middle because of Newt Gingrich and company. But by the same token, I think a president doesn't create the jobs. They create the backdrop for jobs to be created.
Create the atmosphere.